All right, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. So in the last video, I had discussed doing a Zur deck list and some gameplay, and so we'll be doing that today. I'm going to quickly touch on a few things about this deck that are a little bit different from the Brea deck and different from the Zur deck that I actually had at the time and had planned to do a video on, and ended up getting scrapped. So I want to touch on that really quick. Basically, the deal with Zur is that Brian innovated a long time ago, took advantage of a combo that was floating around out there, and innovated adding it to Zur, and it's been very excellent ever since. That combo is Helm of Obedience, Rest in Peace. The way that it works is that Rest in Peace will prevent cards from going to the graveyard. Helm, when you activate it for X, your opponent mills X cards, so X can be 1. So in this case, you typically will activate it for 1. So your opponent would mill 1 card and repeat that process until a creature card or X cards have been put into their graveyard. And since cards cannot be put into their graveyard with Rest in Peace, if you do even 1, it will activate once and then repeat that process because nothing went to the graveyard to satisfy that clause, and then it will just repeat that process indefinitely. And so you end up milling their entire library into exile. So phenomenal combo, and the nice thing is that Zur will get half of it. In order to set that up, Brian would typically search Necropotence out first, and he runs cards like Reliquary Tower and he runs Stop Vessel, both because of the easy access to Necropotence, which will allow Zur to potentially generate a gigantic hand size, and then you can run your combo out protected by 20 plus cards in your hand. Even if you don't have one of the 2 cards that give you unlimited hand size, however, just over necroing for a bunch, putting a bunch of cards into your hand, and then putting the combo together is quite simple to do with this deck. And anytime you're not under pressure, that's exactly how the chain of events unfolds. So the original version of Zur basically ran a lot of cheap interactive cards like Thoughtseize and Duress, a lot of cheap counter spells, free counter spells, cards like Misdirection and Pact of Negation, and things along those lines, because all you want to do is get Zur onto the table, protect it just long enough to attack, get the Necro, and then fill your hand up with a bunch of cards that prevent your opponent from doing anything about the fact that you're going to attack and kill them on the next turn. Attack to get Rip into play, Rest in Peace, Rip, and then helm them out of the game. So that's sort of the way that the game played out. But what I found was that I didn't enjoy the fact that if you are on the back foot, that game plan is it's kind of all in. And so I wanted to build it in the form of a control deck. Also, I just enjoy control a little bit more, with the ability to just combo kill your opponent out of nowhere, and that's pretty nice too. So I was looking at, first of all, when you're playing a Rest in Peace deck, I was looking at cards that you don't want to be using that you typically would use in control. So the list of that: in white is Fiend's Reclamation, in blue you've got Snapcaster Mage, in black you have Yawgmoth's Will. So all of these cards are out, and for any deck, basically, Crucible of Worlds also out. So there's 4 cards that very powerful tools that can be used to recover in the case of Will, or get massive advantage with the other cards, control the game, control your draws. All not available in a Rest in Peace style deck. On the plus side, though, Rest in Peace does stop certain dumb combos that the opponent might be pulling off with Life from the Loam and stuff like that. So it's not all downside. But when I was looking at taking those cards out, I was like, well, how can we still play a control type build? And what I ended up finding was a card that I have overlooked for a long time, but remember from back in the day being pretty good, which was Energy Field. So Energy Field prevents all damage to you by sources you don't control. It's another Urza's Saga busted card. And when a card's put in your graveyard from anywhere, you have to sacrifice it. So at the very least, it can sometimes buy you a couple turns until your opponent's able to put a card in your graveyard. They might disenchant something, wasteland you, him to Torok you, however they're going to get a card in your graveyard. But if they can't, of course, if you were to play a card like Vampiric Tutor, then you'd be putting a card in your graveyard, and that would also kill the energy field. But if you have Rest in Peace out, cards don't go to your graveyard, so energy field doesn't go away, and they actually have to get rid of the Rest in Peace or get rid of the energy field directly. And that's much more difficult to do and puts you in a position kind of very classic to the deck, which would have been in the old days. You have something like Moat in play, negating almost every card your opponent can draw except Disenchant or like Chaos Orb, and then the rest of your deck you save your counters for just those things, and you're basically good. You know, of course they might play like a flyer against a Moat, and you have like a Sword Splashers to deal with it, but it allowed your deck to it allowed you to focus the threats down to a very small percentage of cards because you don't play like endless counter spells, and so you have to use precision countering to protect a board state that protects you. And that's exactly what Energy Field does. And what's great about it is Zur can actually tap and go get Rest in Peace and Energy Field over the course of a couple of turns. You can even do something like go get Energy Field first if you're taking a beating, and then provided they don't have a way to put a card in your graveyard, then you immediately get Rest in Peace and make your situation very difficult for them to get out of. Like the Energy Field buys you just a little bit of time, and then the Rip buys you tons of time and sets you up so that you can finish them off with the Helm combo. So that's kind of what this deck is designed to do. The lands, I'm going to try to scroll down so you can get a shot of the rest of the lands. Basically, after Urborg, you have Verdant, Wasteland, Watergrave, Windswept Heath, the usual. One thing to keep in mind is that you're actually one less fetch land than Berea, so you don't have the red-green fetch because red and green are both the two colors you're not using, so it just doesn't work out in here. And the other thing to keep in mind is that you have Adakar Wastes and Underground River, which are both really nice cards to be using, but they are not islands, whereas in Brea you would have Steam Vents and Volcanic Island. And then you've got Godless Shine, whereas in Brea you'd have Polluted Plateau. And so but mainly the important thing is that because the Adakar Wastes and the Underground River are not islands, it's a little bit more difficult to take advantage of your Vedokan Shackles. So that is something to kind of keep in mind with the deck. And I mean, it's possible that adjustments could be made if we absolutely needed to add a couple more basic lands to ensure that we could reliably Shackles things. But Shackles is good enough that even if you can only take something with one power, sometimes there are threats, that are worth playing the card over, and having that utility and toolbox effect for Tezzeret and stuff is still really good and worthwhile. Some other things is that the new busted Opposition Agent and Hullbreacher in the deck. I don't actually currently have combo cards with these. There are combo cards with these that are really good. For Hullbreacher, we already had Narset, but for Hullbreacher and Narset both being in the deck, a card that I might like would be something along the lines of Time Twister. Would be really nice. It would give the deck a way to recur itself. Like when you're not playing Yawgmoth's Will, then Time Twisters might be your next best bet. And I am very much drawn towards the idea of playing the card. But to be quite honest, Hullbreacher and Opposition Agent were all of my Christmas budget and a little bit more. Luckily, my birthday is late in the year, so I pretty much blew all my magic wad on Opposition Agent Hullbreacher, and I just didn't have enough for a Time Twister, and I absolutely refuse to use the Time Twister that doesn't have the original art on it. So we're talking about like $100-something bucks, and I just can't swing it. So I'm not even sure that it is mandatory, but I can't test it and find out how I feel about it because it's out of my range of getting a hold of one for now. All the decks foil and pretty and expensive and original art and all this stuff, and that's the way I like it. But the cost of that is that I have to build it over time. All these cards I've accumulated in my collection over the years, which makes it affordable as opposed to trying to do it all at once, which makes it impossible. So that's out for now. Another card that would be really interesting to combo with Opposition Agent, I had a Flash of Insight, not the card. I actually had a brainstorm, not the card. Anyway, look, I had a thought, and I tested it out, and it was fantastic. And the card is Wishclaw Talisman. So Wishclaw Talisman is an artifact that it's black and 1, and then you tap it on your turn, give it to your opponent, and you demonic tutor, and then it has 3 charges on it, So you take a charge off and you demonic tutor, you give it to your opponent. Then on their turn, they can demonic tutor, take another charge off, give it back to you, and then you get a third tutor. So you get 2 demonic tutors for the price of 1 for them. And the way that the combo works is you wish claw and you go get opposition agent. You put it in your hand. You say go, and then when they activate it to demonic tutor, and like get say a counter spell or whatever they plan to get to deal with the card that you just got, you flash this guy out, and you get to demonic tutor through their deck and take whatever you want. And then on your turn, you get to demonic tutor again as a proper DT, and then they just get a wish call with no counters on it. But believe me, if you flash out opposition agent, it sticks, and you get to search your deck and take any card. You actually have already won the game at that point. So I very much want to wish call in here. The second combo with it, of course, is that Karn. You use it and you go get Karn, and you play Karn and you shut off all their artifacts and you hand them an artifact that doesn't work. And then later, if you really need to get it back, you can like Thieving Skydiver it back or whatever. But the important thing is that you shut it off. And so, or you animate it with Karn and you shackles it back to your side is another way you can get it back. But getting it back isn't the key. The key is that animate it with Karn and chase it back to your hand. But the key is shutting it off. So you would go get Karn, who shuts off all of their artifacts and is a very strong play. So it's not like you're making a bad play in order to like using Wish Claw to go get Thieving Skydiver so you can Skydiver it back is a bad play because literally all you did was put a 2/1 flyer into play. You spent a bunch of time and did a bunch of nothing. But using it to go get Karn or opposition agent is good because opposition agent on their deck is incredibly powerful, but also opposition agent super oppressive, and so is Karn. So these are reasons why I'd like Wish Claw. And lastly, if you are trying to put together one of your combos, it can just finish the combo off, and you can just win the game. So like you attack with Zur and you get Rest in Peace into play, and then you're looking for the Helm. It's just another way to get the Helm. Sure, you give them a demonic tutor that they can't use because they're dead. That kind of thing. So I would like the card in here, and if any of you has an idea on how to get it in here, let me know. The other, like I said, that and maybe Time Twister effect would be really nice. Another possible Time Twister effect would be like Commit to Memory. The flashback part, the Time Twister for 6, it's slower and clunkier, but at least you get a counter spell, Light, Vindicate Light type card in here. Similar effect. So you have something useful on the way to doing the Time Twister type combo. On the other hand, a flashback, it's not flashback exactly, but whatever, the alternate cost card version of it, the Time Twister version of Commit to Memory. So you can't play it if you get your Rest in Peace out, so it's not necessarily, I don't know. Well, we'll see. Anyway, so those are some cards that I think would be interesting for the deck. I'd certainly like to hear your feedback on that. Now I want to run through some games. I think that's it. One other thing. So why did I switch from Brea to Zur? The number one reason is this card right here. The problem with Jeweled Lotus is it isn't Black Lotus. So if it was Black Lotus and your opponent used Black Lotus to make some crazy play, like running out a turn 2 Zur, you could use your Black Lotus, in theory, to run out a solution, like turn 2 Treachery. But because it isn't Black Lotus, your commander actually has to be the solution or it has to be the problem. Preferably both, which is what Zur is often, both the solution and the problem. Because Zur can, attack and go get Detention Sphere or Seal of Cleansing or Necropotence. It is both the solution to many issues and the problem simultaneously, or Energy Field, right? So answers, problem, and of course the combo piece. So all of our lovely hits. And don't forget, you can also go get mana with it often. So anyway, so Jeweled Lotus, unfortunately, is garbage for Brea. And so in the past, Brea was the solution to problematic commanders like Zur. But now Zur can come down much faster than Brea can, because if I were to go like land Enlightened Tutor for Lotus, turn 2 land Lotus Zur, and my opponent has the exact same start. So they go land Enlightened Tutor for Lotus, land Lotus. They're not casting Brea, and so that means that they're not getting to say they went first. So they follow that line. they're not going to get Brea down quick enough. I'm going to get Zur down. So then on the next turn they get Brea down, but by then I've already got Necropotence in play and the game's over. So this card, because it doesn't allow you to play cards that solve the problem, and it only allows you to make problems for your opponent from your command zone. This card right here has changed which commanders, in my opinion, are even viable, and Brea is just dropped down to not viable as a tier 1 commander because it cannot take advantage of Jeweled Lotus correctly. And the fact that you can use Jeweled Lotus like after Brea is dead for the second casting of it is totally irrelevant. What matters is how do you survive long enough to get to the point where you're worried about casting Brea twice. And Jeweled Lotus doesn't help you get there. And very little does, actually. And so the card just needs, unfortunately, the commander just has to go. And while Jeweled Lotus is only going to happen roughly 7 out of 100 times, not accounting for mulligans and everything else, the fact is, it's going to happen even more than that, because in the hands that you don't have a Jeweled Lotus right away, you may have a Vampiric, you may have an Imperial, or you may have an Enlightened. And so actually the number of Jeweled Lotuses in your deck is actually this many of turn 2 Zurs. So that you can, any of these cards plus 2 lands equals a Zur. Any of these on turn 2. And so that means that you can basically win the game on turn 3 by putting Necropotence into play. And so now you've got a 1 in 25 roughly chance, and you're going to draw 7 cards, which means you have a 7 in 25. So 7 out of 25 is like what? A quarter-ish? So basically 25% of your hands you can potentially just win the game, essentially win the game on turn 2 or 3. Your opponent has to have interaction, has to be immediate, like they've got a Force of Will or Swords to Plowshares right now, or lose. And that's if you don't also have like a Force of Will of your own, or more importantly, something along the lines of Fierce Guardianship, which makes stupid combo even stupider because it doesn't even cost 2 cards, or you might have Force of Negation or whatever. So it's super, super busted and gross to be able to do that. And while you do invest a ton of cards, because the card you're getting is Necro, you get those cards back and you win the game. And Brea just has nothing comparable. So in my opinion, Brea is out. If you do want to play those colors, try Tymna and what is it, Thrasios? No, not Thrasios. The blue-red flyer, Kraus or something along those lines. Anyway, you want the 4/4 flying haste guy who draws extra cards, and you want Tymna, and that way you can like slam one of your commanders pretty early as well, and potentially start drawing extra cards and use those cards to try to find an out. Although even then, it's not great, because once again the problem is those commanders don't actually deal with Zur. The commander that did, we can't play anymore. So. All right, that's enough on that, but that's kind of why I've switched over to Zur. It's still a very enjoyable deck. It's a lot of fun, and I'm going to run you through some games. Now, there's one card in here that doesn't work with Rest in Peace, but I'm still running it, and that card is Mystic Sanctuary. And I'm running it for a couple reasons. If I weren't going to play Mystic Sanctuary, I would actually play a second basic island, because I really feel we need at least 6 islands for Shackles, and this is island number. We have 2 blue whites, 2 blue blacks, a blue, and a blue. So that's island number 6. But Mystic Sanctuary, because it's a land, it's an island, it fits into this very nicely and comfortably. If you already have Rest in Peace out, sure, it's not going to help you in any way, but it's still going to make mana, right? It's still a land. It's still both an island for Shackles, and it's a land that taps for blue. Contrast that to a card like Yawgmoth's Will, Svien's Reclamation, or Snapcaster. At best, of the 3, Yawgmoth's Will and Svien's literally do nothing, and then Snapcaster only is a 2/1 flyer with flash. That's pretty bad, right? Like outside of having like equipment or something, I don't know, and flashing it into like kill a hull breacher or something, like it's still not complete trash, but it's not great. Whereas an island is always going to do what an island's supposed to do for you. So the cost of adding it in is fairly low. And the reward is that up until you get Rest in Peace into play, of course, you have a little tiny smidge of recursion that you can tutor out with certain fetch lands. And that makes it good enough for all those reasons to run it. Like you can, like for example, you can Polluted Delta, the end of turn, Polluted Delta, go get Mystic Sanctuary, put counter spell back on top of your deck. Your turn, draw counter spell, attack with Zur, put Rest in Peace into play. A perfectly valid like sequence of events that'll come up from time to time, allows you to get in that commanding position so that on the next turn you can end the game. So anyway, so that's all the deck techery, I guess. And so I think the rest is fairly self-explanatory. I mean, we do have to run more disenchants. Basically, Fragmentize replaces Vandal Blast. Seal of Cleansing as a tutor target is helpful because we lost Dak Faden, but in exchange for Dak. And there's really not much of a replacement for Dak Faden, but we do have Thieving Skydiver. Of course, Spray could run that as well, but you do what you can. So we lose Dak, we get Thieving Skydiver, steals for 3. We lose a Braid, and instead we get Seal of Cleansing. So basically, we just kind of like shift it around, and ultimately, like Vandal Blast's 1 mana version is Fragmentized. Vandal Blast's 5 mana version ends up being Karn the Great Creator. So we'll see how it goes. There is Heliod's, I forgot what it's called exactly, but it's Heliod's something or other. And I did give some consideration to this card, which Intervention. So X mana instant, which is great. You can muddle for it at 2, and you can exile multiple artifacts and enchantments, or stick yourself with some life, like for example, if you're necroing. But for his life gain at the 2 slot, I ended up sticking with the Stoneforge Mystic, Sword of Feast and Famine combo that goes with Winter Orb and Umezawa's Jitte, which is just the ultimate life gain card whenever you can use it. And very good with Winter Orb because you can kill small creatures, and it does give me a way to kind of turn my commander into a way to handle other commanders just by getting a Jitte on it and building up enough counter that their commander just can't do anything before my commander wins a game for me. Or, if it's not my commander, maybe my Trinket Mage or whatever. So no Skull Clamp, however, because we don't have Thopters flying around like we do in Brea, that we can easily, just reload our hand off of without something like that. Sure, you can Shackles a card, but that's very. If you're already running Shackles and stuff, it's kind of like it's nice, but we don't build a deck around or play a card around like some weird corner case scenarios like that. So, not going to include. Did I say Shackles? I meant Skull Clamp. We're not going to include Skull Clamp. All right, so that's it for the deck. We still have, so now we have extra combos. Energy Field, Rest in Peace as a immunity to damage. Rest in Peace, Helm is an instant win. We still have our Winter Orb combined with either Sword of Feast and Famine, Teferi, or Urza as a totally busted lock, or just a bunch of artifact mana. We still have Brian's Necropotence with, particularly with Thought Vessel, or Reliquary Tower, or in some cases just Necro with Jitte to get like 4 cards per turn is super good. And then we have the newest busted cards that are just so unfair. Opposition Agent, Hull Breacher, just so I don't know if they're unfair, but they're certainly quite frequently, if you stick an opposition agent early in the game and interfere with something like a fetch land, you have literally won the game on the spot. So this is sometimes just 3 mana, instant speed, win the game right now. Hullbreacher is about the same, depending on what's going on. Imagine they brainstorm or Jace or something. Like, God, Jace, they go first, so they get 4 mana and you only have 3, and they tap 4 and they play Jace and they brainstorm, and you play Hullbreacher and you get 3, you get basically a Black Lotus, and they have to put 2 cards in their hand back on top of their deck, and then you attack and kill Jace, and it's like game over. Right, so these cards, incidentally, you must play Hull Breacher and you must play Opposition Agent if you're playing these colors, unfortunately, because the number of cards that we must play within kind of our commander colors, at least from my perspective, has now narrowed the pool of slots that we have of cards that we don't necessarily have to play, cards that are flex flex slots. So the number of flex slots has declined in both blue and black because those two cards are absurd. And then in the artifact slot, I mean, you kind of just have to play Jeweled Lotus unless you're playing a commander that can't use it, in which case you probably have to pick a new commander. So I don't, to be quite honest, care much for that situation. I love the fact that I'm even more powerful, and it'll suck when my opponent does it to me, but mostly I don't really like the effect that these cards have on the game, any of the three cards there, because they're very limiting. And they're also, like, sometimes your opponent gets an advantage. They hit you with the Sword of Feast and Famine. You top deck a Disenchant. You get out of the situation. If your opponent Hull Breachers or opposition agents you successfully, you almost never get out of it. You basically just lose. Like, you Demonic Tutor and the opposition agent that thing, you just lose. Like, there's no recovering from that. They Time Twister and you Hull Breacher it. It's over, right? So I think that that's too much. These tech cards are too powerful. Anyhow, but that's my take on that. I want to run you through some games. I don't want to trade. I don't want to store. Let's try. Good Lord. All right, there we go. Game history. So I'm just going to run through a few games. I just played like 3 games today, so I didn't have a lot of games, but they were interesting enough that I thought, let me do a video because I had a few games from yesterday and a few games before that. Each time narrowing either not with Zur, so I'm not including those, or yesterday I had 3 wins, but the Zur build wasn't quite right, and also I checked the replays and they fell apart. So we're going to just start with today. We'll do some these, and then in the future, when I'm not doing a deck tech, we'll do like a proper run through of a mass quantity of games or whatever. But these games were interesting, so we'll run through them anyway. So Rocky McChesterflex, they were interesting because they don't follow the traditional line of Zur, in which you, like I said, you just go get Necropotence and then you combo them out and kill them. These games actually developed slightly differently, and I think, yeah, all right. So I had to mulligan here. I'm playing against Azusa, lost but sucking. And of course my opponent has a Tree Speaker, and because I have a Force there, I really wanted mana, but I end up sitting on the Force because Tree Speaker's pretty dangerous, and it was a good thing I did because look at Sylvan. There's a Hull Breacher on top, and I get that it shuts Sylvan off, but it would have shut it off a turn late, and I can't afford for that. If I'd have gone first, I would have loved to Hull Breacher a Sylvan, but here I have to force it. My opponent has this incredibly fast start with lots of pressure. Look at this, incredible amounts of pressure. I was hoping that I could opposition agent their Panorama, but funny thing is too about these cards, on top of everything else they do, they can sometimes act like removal. For example, I just killed a Soul Ring, essentially, with an opposition agent right there. I was hoping to get this Panorama, but this can still tap for colorless, so it's not exactly shut off. But the fact that I was able to just free kill that creature and put a creature out who has the potential to attack Garruk, meaning they have to leave something back, is just fantastic, right? So my opponent's down to 1 card in hand. So the reason that I had developed as I did is because I what I understand about the green deck is that while they will turbo out a ton of mana, particularly the Azusa decks, their next step from there is to do something busted. And if they don't naturally draw it, typically what they're going to do is they're going to search it out and win the game. For example, with Tooth and Nail, which opposition agent prevents, or they're going to find some big card draw and try to win that way. There's so many different green card draw spells. Obviously, the most busted is Sylvan Library, which we already dealt with. But there's plenty of other green card draw spells, and we want to deal with that. Either creatures or non-creatures, both. Green can draw a lot of cards, and so Hull Breacher prevents that. So that's why I decided that this was safe. Because basically against green, if I get opposition agent Hull Breacher out, I am taking a beating and board, but at least I don't have to worry too much about what else they can do if they don't naturally draw it. And them having so few cards in hand means that the odds favor that they won't draw what they need before I can draw what I need. However, my life total is under a ton of pressure. I wasn't accounting for this 5 for 3. So on this turn, I go ahead and Merchant Scroll for Force of Will because I do not wish for things to get even further out of hand. And because I also needed to get mana into play because I needed 4 mana. There's no guarantee I'll draw lands, and I need 4 mana for Zur, and that's ultimately my out here. So we'll continue now. So my opponent draws up to 2 cards, plays Arch of Orazka. I was hoping they'd wait to use it on my turn, but no. Instead, goes for an Ulvenwold Hydra. So the Hydra is a 6/6 that allows my opponent to search for a land card put in play tapped like a Strip Mine. But that's not what matters because opposition agent, it does say may search. So had they chosen to search and I let that resolve, obviously I just go get their own Strip Mine to strip their Arch of Orazka. But more importantly, it's a 6/6 and I'm under a ton of pressure life total wise already, so I have to force that there. I have to kill. I let my Jace go, and the reason I do it with Jace is because he played the Arch of Orazka. My opponent played the Arch of Orazka prior to casting this, so I knew about it. So then, plus the logic that I was telling you with green still stands. So I need Hullbreacher more than I need Jace. And Jace, could come down and bounce a token and then die anyway. It's just not great. Unfortunately, however, I'm going to have to play Zur first. So that means my opponent gets to Arch, play a land, untap, and he's just 1 mana short, I think. What is it, 5 to use? So 2 mana shy of Garricking and doing it twice, which is nice. So for this turn, I'm going to actually attack with Zur, and I'm actually going to go get Rip. So that takes care of graveyards. So now I don't have to worry about graveyards or anything my opponent can search. I have a counter spell for a big creature, and I have Hullbreacher for Arch. So I'm hoping that he arches. And if my opponent does use the Arch, which is what I expect, I flash Hullbreacher out, leaving me with just 1 mana. But then the Arch, the card draw procs and gives me a treasure, which gives me 2 mana. So I'm actually safe behind counterspell as well. So we're hoping for that here. Unfortunately, I'm about to eat like 11 to the face. So my opponent does go for the Arch, and I breach her in response. And then I don't know. For me, I think this was really premature. My opponent concedes. Seems a little silly to me. I mean, if I'm them, I attack for 11, and then what am I going to do? I'm not going to block. It drops me that to 9 life. That's what I would have done. Had they done that, of course, I was just going to attack with Zur, and then I was going to go get immunity to all damage, energy field, and from there, I take over the game. And so I would have won. It is true, but I do think that this scoop here was a little bit, unless they had that foresight, and I don't see how they did, but who knows. Then I think that attacking here and passing for the turn would have been correct for them to do, and then see what happens afterwards. Because like if he drops me down to 9, what do we get? Necro for how much can I necro for before I'm dead? Right? Like there aren't a lot of things I can get here that get me out of trouble. But as it turns out, energy field's one, and that's going to be the theme of the next 2 games as well. I love this innovation because it has saved my bacon in all these games. All right, so next game, I have to mulligan. I double mulligan, so very poor situation here, facing down Acri and Timna. I really like this Path of Ancestry, by the way. I need to consider whether or not that could be my 30th land. But in the meantime, my opponent plays their commander out on turn 2. It doesn't seem to be threatening, but I know from past experience this commander is actually very threatening. And of course, luckily, my opponent could play Timna there, but didn't have an artifact like a 0-drop or something. They do now, though, so they're going to start pushing damage and, of course, drawing extra cards off of Timna. Luckily, I have my good friend Hullbreacher here. My opponent then plays an artifact land, cheats a Sword of Feast and Famine into play, and I just disenchant that and float some mana while I'm doing it because I have to go through a Signet and I might as well have a spare mana. Floating, it of course empties from the pool and does nothing. On my turn, I play Tezzeret and go get Winter Orb. So I'm still taking a beating, but it's not quite as bad. My opponent wisely kills Tezzeret. That would be crazy if they didn't. And then plays Sigarda's Aid, which when an equipment comes into play, it can directly attach it. So there can't be all that many threats that my opponent can play under Winter Orb, so I should be safe for a while. So I just run out my commander, and yeah, that was my assumption, but they can also play it as flash, and there's this freaking Colossus Hammer. So it flashes into play, equips. My opponent creature becomes a 13/13 Vigilance first strike, doesn't fly, and bashes me for 13 points of commander damage. Just gross, right? Like I've lost a ton of health, and I'm 1 hit away from losing the game. On my turn, I attack with Zur, and I go for the sort of desperation play here, and I just put Energy Field into play. And now if my opponent did have a card like Wasteland and killed my energy field there, then I could flash Hull Breacher out and chump block and then Vampiric Tutor at the end of their turn. And if they don't have a card like that, then they can't do anything. 13 points of nothing. And all I have to do now is attack a second time. And boop. Rest in peace, my friend. You will not be damaging me this game. Well, hopefully not anyway. There's still a chance here. They could just disenchant. I don't have a counterspell up. But I do have Vampiric Tutor, so I'm going to Vampiric at the end of their turn, flash in the Hull Breacher because I don't need the mana next turn. And then I'm going to obviously get Helm, attack, and I decide that what I want to do is get Detention Sphere, and it's a good thing I got Detention Sphere for their commander and not Seal of Cleansing for their hammer, because my opponent actually has Deflecting SWAT. So they choose new targets, and they choose to target my. They should have targeted Rest in Peace actually, but they target my Winter Orb there, and fortunately the wording on Detention Sphere, unlike there's a white version that was printed in I think Theros of these Oblivion Ring effects, and it only does opponent's permanents. So had I used that one instead of Detention Sphere in the deck, and got that, then my opponent would only be able to Deflecting SWAT over to a one of his other permanents. But Detention Sphere I like a little bit better because it can kill lots of tokens and because you can force with it. So that's what I run. But at any rate, it also says you may exile target non-land permanent. So my opponent redirects it to the Winter Orb, and I just choose not to use it. And then from there, I feel like, you know what, if my opponent could kill one of my Rest in Peace, they would have done so. So I'm going to slam Helm here and go for it. And yeah, opponent has no solution. I'm about to Helm for one, and then my opponent would drop all of their cards from their deck, and they would lose. But thankfully, of course, I'm immune to this frickin' 13-13 commander beating my face in, and pretty low on life too. So Necro wasn't looking particularly great right there. So I was really pleased with Energy Field there. So it was good in the first game, and it was good in the second game. Let's see if it even comes up in the third game or not. And this was played like an hour plus later. The opponent saw me, jumped in, I guess, get some revenge there. I had to double mulligan, so I end up mulliganing into this. I probably should not have kept Mind Twist against such a fast commander. I probably should have kept the Vindicate in my hand. Certainly in hindsight, I should have, because my opponents... But I was thinking, if they don't have that fast of a start, so if they go land and I go land, they go land commander and I go land Grim, they might go land Timna and hit me and draw a card, and then I can Mind Twist their hand away. And while they'll refill their hand, they'll be okay. But I decided to do something a little bit different. Look, I naturally drew Energy Field here, so I'm going to get some mana out. I do kind of, like I said, I wish I had kept Vindicate, though, because it just keeps pressure off me. And then my opponent has Tangle Wire. Ugh. So on turn 2, I played the Talisman, but, I was thinking I'd play Zur. But had I played Grim, then during my upkeep, when Tangle Wire was on the stack, I could have tapped Grim and say, Talisman, put 4 in my pool, then let the Tangle Wire resolve, and then spent the 4 to untap the Grim. And then I could have played a land and Skydiver or something. But unfortunately, I did play the Talisman. It made sense at the time. I didn't know the Tangle Wire was coming. So now I'm in a real tough bind here. Opponent's got a lot of pressure on me once again, and I'm just on a clock. Opponent's running Tower of the Magistrate, which is a neat way to keep you can give a creature protection from artifacts to make equipment fall off of it. All right, so now I've got to tap down. I leave this up, and I draw Mana Crypt. Thank you. And because I'm under so much pressure, look at this. I've already taken 10 points of commander damage with even more coming. I'm up on only these one card in hand, so I just take a risk, and I just cold slam Energy Field into play. And basically, I'm relying on, no Wasteland, no Disenchant, right? But if they don't have anything, they can't even play Timna and use it to draw cards because I'm taking no damage. And this doesn't say if you attacked with unblocked. This says if you deal damage. So, deal combat damage. So, this actually has the potential to get me out of this nasty situation. And sure enough, opponent hits me for 0 and looks at their hand and concedes. They have nothing. They have no way to deal with Energy Field. And then from there, I can't cast Mind Twist because, it'll kill the Energy Field. And I won't cast Thieving Skydiver because that gives them a Lightning Bolt target. But I can cast my commander, which is a harder one to kill. Often the kill card would be Swords to Plowshares, in which case it wouldn't trigger the energy field anyway. So I'd play my commander here, and then the turn after that I can attack with him, and I'll go get Rest in Peace, and immediately from there I can go ahead and Mind Twist my opponent, and that's it, right? Like I'm in the money. Then after that, I go get Necro. I Necro for a ton of cards, knowing that my opponent can't damage me. Now, keep in mind, Energy Field, it's prevent all damage dealt to you by sources you don't control. So it will not protect you against like a Talisman or a Mana Crypt. So don't think that you're immune to damage. It's just your opponent who can't hurt you. So do keep in mind that you can Necro yourself to a point where Mana Crypt will actually kill you with it, even with your Energy Field in play. So keep that in mind. Another good reason to have Jitte in the deck, and lots of disenchants if you need to get rid of your own crypt for some reason if you're not comboing out quickly. But yeah, so this innovation, I love it. I think it absolutely belongs in here. It just gives you just an incredibly different and difficult angle of approach to winning a game against your opponent, where they've got to have specifically enchantment destruction or they're not winning, unless they have some kind of a combo deck that doesn't need to do damage to beat you. So for example, if they're running their own Helm combo, then they could still beat you. But even a deck like Storm actually cannot beat an Energy Field, right? Because typically, so if they have Storm and they're milling you out, then yeah, you're going to lose. But if they have Storm and they're trying to kill you with Tendrils, they're not, then you're fine. So the other thing to keep in mind, incidentally, with Energy Field is that loss of life will still hurt you. So if your opponent had a card like Sign in Blood and they pointed it at you and made you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, and you were at 2 or 1, then that would kill you. So keep that in mind as well. But other than that, I love the innovation. So what do you think? I talked about some cards that I might like in the deck. Time Twister, Wishclaw Talisman, perhaps that land that my opponent played, the one that produces mana of any color, looks really good to me. And I really wouldn't mind a 30th land, to be quite honest. Other things, so what do you think? Take a look, and I look forward to your input. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and that you have a Happy New Year. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.